For years, Hollywood movies have been selling us the same beautiful image. Majestic stone walls, knights in shining armor, and tables groaning with roasted meat. It seems that life in a medieval castle was like a harsh but incredibly romantic fairy tale. But the harsh reality of the 1200s would very quickly shatter these naive illusions. If a modern person suddenly found themselves in such a fortress, they would last a day at most. And the issue here isn't sieges, enemy arrows, or large-scale bloody battles at all. The main enemy within these stone walls was the harshness of everyday life itself. What we consider basic comforts today simply did not exist back then. Your body, accustomed to sterile cleanliness, warm water, and antibiotics, would go into shock instantly. The local environment was so harsh that mere survival became a real struggle. Sounds like a bit of an exaggeration for dramatic effect, doesn't it? But let's break down exactly what would break you in just 24 hours. Imagine you're playing a tense Dota match after a hard day's work. You're tired, you make mistakes, but you know you can always start over or just quit. In a medieval castle, there were no save points or safe zones at all. Every mundane task, from taking a sip of water to going to the bathroom, held a deadly threat. Modern science has only recently proven just how extreme these conditions were for the human body. Get ready, because our journey will forever change your perspective on historical novels. The first thing you'll encounter inside the castle is an incredibly piercing cold. Forget about that pleasant, cool air your home air conditioner creates in the summer. The thick stone walls were designed solely to protect against catapults, not to retain heat. They function like giant refrigerators, constantly absorbing moisture from the surrounding earth. Even on a hot July day, thick steam would often rise from your mouth inside the fortress. And at night, the temperature in the corridors dropped so low that the water in the jugs would freeze. You'll surely immediately recall the huge fireplaces so beautifully depicted in movies. But here lies the main engineering flaw of the architects of the 12th century. These majestic hearths were shockingly inefficient sources of heat for large stone rooms. About 80% of the precious heat simply vanished up the wide chimney along with the smoke. If you stood right next to the fire, your face would literally burn from the unbearable heat. At the same time, your back would break out in goosebumps from the icy draft. To escape these icy winds even a little, people came up with the idea of hanging tapestries on the walls. Today we view them as beautiful works of art in museums, but in the Middle Ages, it was a matter of basic physical survival. The thick woven tapestries created an air pocket between the cold stone and the living space of the room. They helped trap the tiny bits of warmth provided by the inefficient fireplace. Plus, the fabric did a great job of muffling the echoing sound of footsteps under the high stone arches. Sleeping in such Spartan conditions was a true test of physical endurance. Lords and ladies used beds with heavy canopies, not for beauty or aesthetics at all. The thick curtains created a sort of tent inside, which retained the heat of their bodies and breath. You would have wrapped yourself in every possible woolen shirt and itchy nightcap. Modern tourists often complain about the cold in a tent, even with high-tech sleeping bags. In the castle, you would have been shivering under a coarse blanket, desperately dreaming of a simple radiator. Before going to sleep, the servants had to perform the mandatory ritual of warming the bed. No one in their right mind would lie down in an icy bed right away. The maids would take special metal braziers with long handles filled with hot coals from the fireplace. They carefully moved these braziers between the stiff sheets, trying not to start a fire. Sometimes, instead of coals, they simply used heavy stones heated to the limit in the fire. But this pleasant warming effect vanished after just a couple of hours of deep sleep. But the real nightmare began when you had to leave that cozy bed. The stone floors always remained icy, drawing the heat away through any leather boots or woolen socks. Walking down the hallway meant getting a blast of biting wind from the open, unglazed windows. Yes, window glass in those harsh times was an astronomically expensive and extremely rare luxury. Windows were covered with ordinary wooden shutters that let drafts through every tiny crack. Your immune system, unaccustomed to constant hypothermia, was guaranteed to give out by the evening of the first day. Instead of unattainable glass, people tried to cover window openings with whatever materials were at hand. Most often they used parchment, which was generously soaked in animal fat or oil. Such a semi-transparent barrier provided some protection from rain and sudden gusts of wind. Less commonly, they used thin slices of cow horn held together with lead bindings. Of course, it was impossible to enjoy beautiful landscapes through such murky barriers. They let in only a dim, yellowish light, making the room even more gloomy and depressing. Another critical problem was inextricably linked to the constant cold: pitch-black darkness. Castles were built as military defensive structures, so the windows were made narrow in the form of loopholes. Even at sunny noon, a perpetual, gloomy twilight reigned inside the main halls and corridors. And as soon as the sun set, the massive fortress was plunged into an utterly impenetrable, terrifying darkness. Wax candles cost a fortune, so they were lit only on special, major holidays. The usual everyday source of light was cheap tallow candles made from animal fat. These tallow candles were a true, refined torment for your modern sense of smell. They smoked so heavily that the stone ceilings quickly became covered in a thick layer of black, acrid soot. The smell of burning animal fat resembled the aroma of meat that had long since gone bad in the summer sun. If you've ever forgotten to take out the trash for a week, just multiply that smell by 10. Eyes constantly watered and reddened from the acrid smoke, which hung thick in the stuffy air of the room. Modern doctors would call this a direct and very short path to chronic asthma. To move around at night with any semblance of safety, people use torches everywhere. But here too, Hollywood cruelly deceives us with its beautiful and pristine scenes of lighting. A torch does not burn with an even flame. It hisses loudly, spits sparks, and reeks horribly of resin. Hot soot constantly flies off it, which can easily burn through your expensive clothes. Walking with it up narrow, winding stone staircases is a real test of coordination. One wrong move and you'll either set yourself on fire or tumble headlong into the darkness. Forget about the orthopedic benefits in the pleasant memory foam of your modern pillow. Mattresses back then were tightly stuffed with straw, which very quickly clumped into hard lumps. But the main problem lay not in the stiffness at all, but in the inhabitants of that dry straw. Bed bugs, fleas, and mites considered your bed their rightful home and daily dining hall. They would bite you all night long, causing excruciating itching and severe allergic reactions. By morning, you would look as if you just recovered from a very aggressive form of chickenpox. During the day, there was absolutely no escape from the ubiquitous insects either. It was customary to cover the stone floors in the halls with a thick layer of dried reeds and fragrant herbs. This was done with the best of intentions, to at least somewhat mask the monstrous stench of unwashed bodies and food waste. But beneath this plant-based carpet, a separate and very rich life was teeming. Beetles bred there, scraps from the master's table hid there, and the household dogs relieved themselves there. A walk through such a hall was always accompanied by an unpleasant crunch and the risk of picking up new parasites. So, only 12 hours have passed since your arrival in the past. You're frozen to the bone, reek of smoke, and are covered in itchy red bites. You haven't slept a wink and feel completely exhausted, worn out, and sick. Your body has already gone into emergency panic mode and is demanding an immediate return to the 21st century. And yet you haven't even tried to have breakfast with some authentic local food. And it is in the kitchen that the next deadly historical surprise is patiently waiting for you. When you finally wake up from the cold, your empty stomach will insistently demand breakfast. And that's when your modern digestive system will take a blow of unprecedented force. In the Middle Ages, water was literally a liquid and highly unpredictable game of Russian roulette with death. No one understood the concept of bacteria, so wells were often located unacceptably close to cesspools. Drinking a glass of ordinary raw water meant voluntarily inviting dysentery or cholera into your body. Modern epidemiologists would simply be appalled at the sight of such catastrophic sanitation. But people in the past were far from fools and noticed this pattern quite quickly. They realized that drinking ordinary water often led to a long and very painful death. Therefore, a very weak ale became the basic daily drink for everyone, including small children. The long process of fermentation and brewing reliably killed most of the deadliest pathogens. It was a kind of ancient, tasty antiseptic that completely replaced clean drinking water for people. On a typical day, an ordinary castle dweller could easily drink up to several liters of this distinctive beverage. The nobility could afford to drink wine brought from afar in large oak barrels. However, this wine had nothing in common with the exquisite beverages found in modern boutiques. During long transport, it inevitably soured, acquiring a sharp and extremely unpleasant vinegary taste. To make this swill even slightly palatable, honey and expensive spices were added to it. This hot spiced drink was called hippocras and was considered the pinnacle of culinary art. To a modern taster, this thick syrup would seem simply unbearably cloying and harsh. Imagine the state your body would be in from such a strange drinking regimen. A mild but very steady and constant state of intoxication would accompany you from the very morning. Severe dehydration would set in very quickly as alcohol actively draws fluid out of the body. By noon, you'd have an unbearable splitting headache from a classic medieval beer hangover. Any attempt to find a clean spring far beyond the stone walls would end in complete failure. You'd have to choke it down and keep drinking warm beer just to quench your thirst. Now let's take a close look at that plate that will be solemnly served to you for breakfast. Most likely it will be a piece of stale bread and some kind of mysterious, greasy meat stew. Medieval bread was radically different from the fluffy, soft toast from the nearest supermarket. Peasants often mixed flour with acorns, crushed peas, or even sawdust to increase the volume. The millstones left fine stone grit in the flour, which slowly wore down teeth day after day. Dentists of that time, by the way, treated any cavities exclusively by roughly pulling out the tooth with pliers. In addition to sawdust and stones, bread could harbor a far more terrifying biological threat. Rye flour was often contaminated with ergot, an extremely toxic and dangerous parasitic fungus. Consuming such bread caused severe hallucinations, convulsions, and acute burning pain in the limbs. In the Middle Ages, this mysterious illness was called St. Anthony's fire and was considered a divine curse. Entire villages could go mad after a failed harvest during a rainy, damp summer. Your modern stomach would hardly be able to survive even a single such toxic breakfast. Meat was plentiful in the castle, as wealthy lords loved to hunt regularly. But the methods used to preserve it long-term would surely make you turn down a hearty dinner. There were no refrigerators, so meat was heavily salted, smoked, or generously sprinkled with expensive spices. This was often done specifically to mask the distinct stench of the onset of decay. Your stomach, accustomed to fresh, vacuum-sealed foods, would instantly and violently rebel. Severe food poisoning would be merely a matter of time and the size of the portion consumed. The very process of preparing meat dishes in the castle's gigantic kitchen looked like a scene from the underworld. Huge animal carcasses were roasted whole on massive spits directly over an open, roaring flame. To prevent the meat from burning, the spit had to be turned continuously for hours on end through the acrid smoke. Usually, this grueling work was assigned to the youngest servants or even to special breeds of dogs. The heat was unbearable, and fat constantly dripped into the fire, creating suffocating clouds of burnt soot. No one in this kitchen hell even gave a thought to sanitary standards or the simple act of washing one's hands. Vegetables were considered food for the poor and rarely appeared fresh on the tables of the nobility. They were boiled long and mercilessly until they became an indistinct gray mush, destroying absolutely all the vitamins. Scurvy, a terrible disease caused by a lack of vitamin C, was a common occurrence even among the very wealthy. If you enjoy munching on a fresh green salad, you would be in for the most brutal disappointment here. The food was incredibly heavy, excessively fatty, and critically difficult to digest properly. Modern nutritionists would call such a dense diet a direct path to a heart attack by the age of 30. Salt cost a fortune and was always the main indicator of a castle owner's high status. The closer you sat to the huge salt shaker at a feast, the higher your standing in society. But no one in those days worried about electrolyte balance or high blood pressure. Salted fish had to be soaked for days before cooking to make it even remotely edible. At the same time, the taste of the dishes was often overpowered by sour vinegar, which the cooks generously added to everything. Your poor liver would have begged for mercy after just the first such festive meal. In addition to salt, the nobility actively demonstrated their wealth through the use of exotic Eastern spices. Pepper, cloves, and cinnamon were valued literally as much as pure gold and were shipped from distant lands. Cooks sprinkled them into meat pies and soups in simply astronomical and completely excessive quantities. This was done not for the sake of refined taste, but so that guests would appreciate the host's immense financial power. Such a massive dose of hot spices would completely burn out the taste buds of someone unaccustomed to it. For you, such a luxurious dinner would be a real test of your stomach lining's endurance. Imagine this scene. You're sitting in a cold hall, chewing tough meat and drinking murky ale. Your digestive system, in shock, struggles to process the coarse, heavy food mixed with small stones. Due to the complete lack of fresh fiber, serious and painful intestinal problems begin. Any complaint of stomach pain would be treated with copious bloodletting or enemas containing dubious herbs. And believe me, you would very much not want to entrust your health to a typical medieval physician. His methods of treatment were often far more dangerous and painful than the original illness itself. Several more hours have passed since you arrived in this extremely inhospitable world. You're hungry, but you're terrified to eat the local food for fear of dying from food poisoning. You're thirsty, but a sip of water could be your last fatal mistake. Your body is desperately trying to adapt, but the surrounding conditions are too extreme and hostile. And then comes the inevitable moment when nature takes its course, and you need to use the restroom. Congratulations, you have arrived at the most foul-smelling and terrifying aspect of medieval architecture. In modern, well-appointed homes, the bathroom is a place of pristine cleanliness and relaxation. In the year 1200, it was literally a tiny room of fear and deep revulsion. Toilets in castles, which were elegantly referred to as wardrobes, were simple, cold stone niches. A hole gaped in the stone floor, leading directly outside, onto the castle's sheer wall or into the moat. No quiet flush, no soft toilet paper, no pine-scented air freshener. Such pungent odors rose from there that a modern person would instantly feel dizzy. The wind often blew directly into these openings, whipping up clouds of acrid odor and splashes of sewage. In winter, the stones were covered with frost, and a visit to such a toilet became a real test of endurance. Sitting on an icy stone was not only unpleasant, but also hazardous to one's health due to the risk of hypothermia. No one cared about privacy, so such niches could be located in the most unexpected places on the fortress walls. Architects of the time thought only of ensuring that waste fell as far away from the foundation as possible. In reality, however, it all simply ran down the walls, leaving dark and foul-smelling stains on them. The smell of human waste was a constant and familiar backdrop to medieval life. The moats around defensive castles often turned into open, stagnant, and rotting sewers. On a hot, windless summer day, this unbearable stench would envelop the entire fortress in a thick cloud. People of that time quickly got used to it. Their olfactory receptors simply, mercifully shut down. But your modern nose, accustomed to the subtle sense of perfume and shampoo, would simply be overwhelmed. For many pampered tourists, even mild, unpleasant odors trigger nausea, and here the concentration was off the charts. Imagine that this smell follows you everywhere, whether during a lavish feast or while you sleep. It seeped into the walls, into the heavy carpets, and even into the hair of the castle's inhabitants. No amount of airing out helped, because it smelled just as bad, if not worse, outside. Manure from hundreds of horses in the courtyard mingled with the smell of rotting food and slop. The sun only intensified this nightmarish effect, causing the whole mass to actively waft and evaporate. For a medieval person, it was simply the smell of life, but for us, it would be the smell of certain doom. Instead of soft, multi-ply toilet paper, all sorts of improvised materials were used everywhere. At best, these might have been wide leaves, stiff tufts of grass, or rough pieces of old cloth. Sometimes shared, reusable sponges were used, which today sounds like an epidemiologist's worst nightmare. Infections and painful skin irritations were an absolutely common and daily occurrence. Any tiny micro tear could quickly become inflamed and lead to a serious blood infection. Antiseptic healing creams did not exist, so the only option was to grit one's teeth and endure the pain. Royalty could afford scraps of old linen or even soft sheep's wool. But even these materials fell far short of the hygiene standards we're accustomed to today. Common people had to make do with scraps of straw, which scratched and injured their delicate skin. Imagine how many bacteria got into those wounds every time they visited the lavatory. The immune systems of people back then were working at their absolute limit every second. Without basic soap and clean running water, any hygiene routine turned into a game of Russian roulette. I wonder why these foul-smelling rooms were called by the elegant word wardrobe. It turns out that expensive outerwear made of natural wool was often hung above the toilet openings. It was believed that the sharp smell of ammonia was excellent at repelling voracious moths and other harmful insects. In other words, your most beautiful and elegant dress was deliberately and thoroughly saturated with the smell of ammonia. It sounds incredibly strange, but the harsh logic of the 1200s worked exactly that way. Clothes were washed extremely rarely, so as not to accidentally ruin very expensive fabrics and rare dyes. Washing clothes was, in general, a monumental and incredibly arduous physical task for the maids. An aggressive lye mixed with ordinary ash was often used as an effective detergent. This mixture was so caustic that it quickly corroded the skin on the poor laundress's hands until it bled. You certainly wouldn't be able to change into clean shirts every day, as you've long been accustomed to doing at home. Dirt, ingrained sweat, and body oils would build up on the fabric in thick layers for weeks on end. Your favorite sweater would turn into a stiff, unbearably smelly shell in just a couple of weeks. Laundry was rubbed against stones in cold river water for a long time in an attempt to beat out the ingrained dirt. After such a procedure, the fabric would thin and tear, and the women's hands would be covered in non-healing sores. To bleach the shirts, they were soaked in vats of sour urine, which also served as a kind of bleach. Just imagine the smell in the laundry yard in the middle of the workday. After such a wash, the clothes were rinsed for a long time, but the distinctive odor still lingered on the fibers. Taking a hot bath was an extremely rare event and a technically very complex process. To fill a huge wooden tub, servants had to bring dozens of heavy buckets of water from the well. Then this icy water had to be heated for a very long time in cauldrons over an open fire. The entire family would often bathe in turn in the same heated water, starting with the eldest lord. By the time it was the turn of the last members of the household, the water resembled a thick, gray, dirty sludge. Your instinct for cleanliness would simply scream in horror at the prospect of climbing into that murky water. In those days, people washed their hair at best once every few long weeks. There were no professional volumizing shampoos or nourishing conditioners for silkiness. Dirty, greasy hair was often hidden tightly under bonnets or hats to conceal its terrible condition. Lice were such a common and everyday problem that they were hardly noticed at all. Special fine-toothed bone combs were used every single day to comb out the pesky parasites. You would scratch your head every spare moment, desperately dreaming of a simple bottle of a miracle cure. The scalp beneath tight head coverings was constantly itchy and inflamed from insect bites. To clean the hair even a little, people used a fine powder made from ground bones or ash. This was supposed to absorb excess oil, but in reality it only created a gray, sticky crust on the head. The lack of basic personal hygiene created truly ideal conditions for the spread of all kinds of diseases. Dirty hands, bodies that hadn't been washed in ages, and an incredible abundance of biting parasites were the absolute norm. Even the slightest accidental scratch could prove fatal due to the abundance of germs and dirt all around. If you accidentally cut your finger in the kitchen, the likelihood of a severe infection was nearly 100%. Your immune system, thoroughly accustomed to the sterile conditions of the modern city, would be completely helpless. The bacteria our ancestors fought against have long been eradicated from our daily lives, and we have completely lost our defenses. In those days, people were unaware of the existence of the microbe world and the connection between hand hygiene and health. Cooks could prepare food without washing their hands after cleaning a stable or butchering an animal. Cutlery was wiped on dirty clothes, and plates were simply rinsed in a bucket of murky water. Intestinal disorders were so common that they weren't even considered a serious illness. People lived in constant symbiosis with billions of bacteria that would kill us in a matter of days today. Our concept of safety is simply incompatible with the reality of the 13th century. The smell of unwashed, sweaty bodies in the castle's crowded rooms was so thick you could literally cut it with a knife. To at least somewhat mask this heavy stench, the stone floors were often strewn with fragrant herbs and fresh reeds. When someone walked across the hall, the dry herbs would be crushed, releasing a rather pleasant herbal scent. But the main problem was that these herb-strewn floor coverings were neither cleaned nor replaced for months on end. Over time, they became thoroughly mixed with food scraps, mud from shoes, and dog feces. The result was a foul-smelling, rotting mass on the floor, teeming with insects and dangerous bacteria. Mice and rats scurried beneath a layer of straw, feeling right at home there. Guests might accidentally step on a bone thrown to a dog a week earlier during the previous dinner. All this mess underfoot began to ferment, emitting even more complex and repulsive odors. The servants would only occasionally sprinkle a fresh layer of grass on top to hide the most noticeable patches of dirt. Thus, the floor of the castle's main hall turned into a giant, multi-layered dump right in the middle of the house. You wouldn't even dare to sit on a bench without first checking it for crawling insects. By the end of your first long day, you would fully realize the true scale of the sanitary disaster. You breathe stale air that causes spasms in your lungs from the sharp smell of sewage and smoke. Your skin itches unbearably from bedbug bites and the long absence of a simple hot shower. You're afraid to touch your face, knowing full well how much invisible grime has accumulated on your hands. The psyche of a modern city dweller is simply not genetically equipped to handle such a colossal level of discomfort. And this is where the final terrifying factor comes into play, the one that would finally break you. Sooner or later, the harsh conditions of the stone castle would make you seriously ill. Perhaps it would be a severe cold from the drafts, or an acute intestinal infection from unclean water. And at this critical moment, a respected local doctor or healer would surely be summoned to you. Modern medicine operates on the basis of a rigorous evidence base, precise instruments, and laboratory tests. Medicine in the year 1200 relied on convoluted astrology and the ancient theory of the four humors. For you, this would mean the start of a treatment that in your experience would feel far worse than the initial illness itself. The doctor would come to you in a long cloak and begin to carefully study the position of the stars in the sky. He wouldn't be interested in your body temperature or pulse rate as we understand them today. He would discuss the balance of black bile and blood, trying to figure out which planet was influencing you. You would have to drink strange concoctions whose taste would make you shudder with deep revulsion. Every action of the physician would seem to you a meaningless ritual, devoid of any logic. In that world, recovery was a matter of chance, not the result of competent care. The primary and most cherished tool of any doctor of that time was a sharp lancet for bloodletting. It was sincerely believed that absolutely all illnesses stem from an excess of bad blood in the human body. Headache from overwork? Let's bleed the vein immediately. Stomach upset from spoiled meat? Let's bleed into a basin again. If you tried to explain the modern concept of viruses to them, they would immediately consider you a dangerous madman. Losing a whole pint of blood would weaken your already exhausted body to the very brink of collapse. The procedure was often performed in a dirty room, using the same knife on several patients. The doctor would simply cut the vein and wait until enough dark fluid had flowed into the basin. You might feel sick, you might lose consciousness, but the doctor would consider this a sign of success. Blood was drawn until the patient turned as pale as a sheet and was completely powerless. After such an intervention, the body lost its last reserves for fighting a real infection. Instead of relief, you ended up with yet another open wound and the risk of dying from simple blood loss. Another incredibly popular treatment method involved ordinary, slimy, medicinal leeches. A modern student recently started breeding them as a joke for his biology research project. Now he supplies them to top clinics and consistently earns far more than his university professor. But in the Middle Ages, they were applied to the body by the dozen under absolutely wild, unsanitary conditions. Often the same hungry leeches were used on different patients without the slightest attempt at cleaning. It was a perfect, uninterrupted conveyor belt for transmitting infections from one sick person to another. If you developed a serious wound infection, no one would offer you life-saving antibiotics. Alexander Fleming would not accidentally discover penicillin for another 7 long, cold centuries. Instead, a festering wound might be brutally cauterized with a red-hot iron or generously doused with boiling oil. It sounds like the most sophisticated torture scene from a cheap horror movie, but it was standard medical protocol. The pain shock from such a radical procedure could easily kill an adult on the spot. Your delicate nervous system, accustomed to a dentist's anesthetic injection, simply wouldn't have been able to withstand it physically. Red-hot metal sizzled as it touched living flesh, causing unbearable, paralyzing pain. The smell of burning flesh instantly filled the room, and you would simply pray for a quick death. It was believed that fire killed the invisible demons of disease that had taken up residence inside your wound. If the oil wasn't hot enough, they might heat it right before your eyes before pouring it onto your skin. The screams of patients in such hospitals echoed throughout the neighborhood, drowning out the noise of the market square. In a world without anesthesia, any serious treatment became a true test of your will to live. Very strange and unstable mixtures of various herbs and wine were often used as painkillers. Some of them contained belladonna or other poisonous plants in extremely dangerous and unpredictable proportions. The exact dosage was calculated literally by eye, based solely on the doctor's personal intuition. If you drank it and survived, great. That meant the treatment was indeed correct and had worked wonders. If the patient died in agony, well, such was the inevitable will of the heavens. There were simply no lawsuits for medical malpractice or proceedings to revoke medical licenses. Such concoctions could cause hallucinations, seizures, or even sudden cardiac arrest. You could fall into a nightmarish delirium, unable to tell what was real and what was a figment of your poisoned mind. A doctor might add crushed deer antlers or dried spiders to the wine to enhance the magical effect. Often, such drinks caused severe vomiting, which was considered yet another way to purify the body. No one tested the safety of these recipes in laboratories. Everything was based on ancient myths and rumors. You were merely a guinea pig in the hands of someone who didn't really understand what they were doing. Ancient Roman physicians once successfully treated battle wounds with a mixture of pure vinegar, honey, and good wine. It sounds like an excellent and delicious recipe for a fragrant dressing for a light summer salad. But modern scientists have proven that all three of these components possess real antibacterial properties. Unfortunately, by the year 1200, this valuable ancient knowledge had largely been lost forever. It was replaced by gruesome poultices made of fresh manure, dirty spider webs, or ground-up dried insects. Applying such filth to an open wound guaranteed the rapid development of deadly gangrene. Dentistry in those grim times deserves a separate, detailed mention and a shudder of horror. The profession of dentist did not exist in principle. Diseased teeth were pulled by ordinary, strong blacksmiths or barbers. They used crude metal pliers, paying absolutely no attention to the disinfection of their tools. They would simply loosen the tooth and yank it out by force, while the unfortunate patient screamed in agony. Often the jaw would snap with a crunch, or adjacent, perfectly healthy teeth would be irreparably damaged. My jaws instinctively and painfully clench at the very thought of this process. They would simply sit you down on an ordinary stool and ask you to hold on tightly to its edges. The blacksmith would lean his full weight on you, trying to hook the slippery, decayed tooth with a rusty instrument. The pain could drive you mad, but the strong arms of his assistants held you firmly in place. After extraction, no one stitched up the wound. At best, they sprinkled it with ordinary ash or salt. The risk of getting a jawbone infection was enormous, and people often died from toothaches. Teeth at that time were a real curse that haunted every person from their earliest youth. Any oral surgery was a true gamble, with a survival rate of about 10%. Doctors never washed their hands before reaching into the deep, open wound of a moaning patient. They wore aprons thickly coated with the dried blood of previous patients as a special mark of their experience. The dirtier and stiffer the apron, the more respected the surgeon was considered in the society of that time. A modern first-year medical student would faint at the violation of all basic rules of asepsis. For people of that time, thick pus in a wound was considered a good sign and a sure sign of rapid healing. Medieval pharmacies were strange little shops selling dubious powders made from crushed stones and horns. You might be prescribed, in all seriousness, to eat ground-up Egyptian mummies or drink a murky toad tincture. Such exotic medicines cost a fortune, but their actual effectiveness was absolutely zero. At best, they worked as a powerful, psychological placebo effect for very gullible, wealthy lords. At worst, they added severe toxic poisoning to your current unpleasant symptoms of illness. Your home first aid kit with ordinary aspirin and Band-Aids would have been a true, priceless treasure here. Apothecaries mixed mercury, lead, and arsenic, believing in their magical healing properties. A patient might take such concoctions for years, slowly destroying their internal organs and mental health. On the shelves stood jars containing dried lizard tails and ground-up teeth of unknown sea monsters. You were offered treatment based on superstition and fear of the incomprehensible natural world. Even ordinary charcoal, which could have helped with poisoning, was mixed with poisonous herbs. As a result, the medicine itself became a poison that finished off those who had managed to survive the illness itself. An encounter with such medieval medicine would have been the final blow of your first few days. Weakened by the biting cold, dehydrated by warm ale, and terrified by the unsanitary conditions, you would have finally given up. Your modern immune system, carefully protected for years by vaccinations, simply could not have adapted so quickly. Life in a massive stone castle demanded a steel-like resilience that was forged in people from the earliest childhood. Only the strongest individuals survived, while the weak were ruthlessly weeded out in the very first years of their lives. You would have realized once and for all that the romance of knightly tournaments is merely a tiny, beautiful facade of an incredibly brutal reality. If you actually had a working time machine, a trip back to the year 1200 would be a real shock. You would very quickly realize that your boring office work and minor stresses are a real five-star resort. We complain bitterly about slow mobile internet, while our distant ancestors were struggling to survive in cold, dark stone cells. History is incredibly cruel, and it has absolutely no tolerance for physical weakness or excessive urban pampering. The people who built these magnificent, impregnable castles were of a completely different breed and possessed phenomenal endurance. Over millennia, their bodies adapted to conditions that would guarantee our death in less than a day. Every tiny detail of their harsh daily life was strictly subordinated to a single goal: to survive until the next day. They drank warm beer instead of water, not for fun, but simply to avoid dying from bacteria. They slept in wooden chests and under thick canopies to keep from freezing to death on cold winter nights. All these habits, which seem strange and frightening to us today, had a strict and impeccable evolutionary logic of survival. And although modern high technology makes our lives safe, we have forever lost that primal biological resilience. Your typical cramped city apartment with central heating is an incredible luxury, one that was inaccessible even to the most powerful medieval kings. So the next time you watch another beautiful historical series, always remember the harsh truth. Behind the magnificent silk costumes lay biting lice, ingrained grime, and the constant stench of long, unwashed bodies. Behind the majestic royal banquets lay slightly spoiled, disguised meat and murky ale instead of clear water. You certainly wouldn't want to spend a single extra minute of your comfortable, modern life there. You wouldn't last 24 hours within those eerie yet romantic walls. Cherish your hot shower, clean bottled water, and working radiator. They are your truest and most reliable saviors.